She arrived in Seoul with a wedding ring on her finger, a child in her womb, and the belief that love was strong enough to overcome anything. But that night, the night of torrential rain, the night her mother-in-law pushed her down a marble staircase, she lost it all in less than 30 seconds. Her unborn child, her husband of 6 years who wouldn't even hold her hand, and the only person who rescued her from the cold, rainy Seoul sidewalk was the most dangerous mafia boss in South Korea. If you're watching this story, please like and comment with the name of the city you're watching in so I know how far this story has progressed. And don't turn off the screen, because this is just the beginning. The rain had been falling since morning, the kind that didn't announce itself with thunder or warning, but simply arrived, gray and relentless and indifferent, the way certain kinds of grief arrive before the mind is ready to name them. Nia Carter stood at the window of the bedroom she shared with her husband and watched Seoul disappear behind a curtain of water. 4 months. That was how long she'd been in this country. 4 months inside this house that didn't belong to her, inside a marriage that had been slowly revealing its architecture, and not the kind she'd been promised. She pressed one hand flat against the glass. The cold came through immediately, climbing her palm and settling in her wrist. Beneath her sternum, just slightly left of center, she felt the small flutter that had been visiting her for the past 3 weeks. Not pain, not discomfort, something quieter than that. Movement. The particular kind of movement that makes a woman stop mid-sentence and go absolutely still, the way she was still now, palm flat against the window, breath held. She was 4 months pregnant. She was 29 years old. She had left Chicago with 2 suitcases and the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. She was no longer certain of that. The bedroom door didn't open so much as it was pushed, that particular quality of entry that telegraphs mood before a single word is spoken. Elias Hahn came in already dressed for something, already carrying the specific posture of a man who had decided a conversation before having it. He was wearing the charcoal blazer she'd bought him on their 2nd anniversary. She noticed that detail and filed it somewhere it would hurt later. "My mother wants dinner at 7, he said. He was looking at his phone. "It's 5:30, Nia said. She didn't turn from the window. "So? "So I haven't eaten since this morning. The kitchen staff told me lunch wasn't prepared because your mother changed the schedule and didn't. I'll have someone bring you something." He still wasn't looking at her. His thumb was moving across the screen with the particular focused efficiency of a man answering someone more important. Nia turned from the window. She'd done this 100 times in the last 4 months. Assembled her patience, smoothed the edges of what she actually wanted to say, and delivered something gentler, something that wouldn't start a thing. She was tired of doing that. "Elias," she waited until he looked up. "I need to talk about your mother." The quality of his attention changed, not dramatically. Elias Hahn was not a dramatic man. He was the kind of man who expressed displeasure through incremental withdrawal, slightly less warmth, slightly more distance, until you were alone in a room with him, and somehow still alone. "What about her?" "She told the household staff this morning that my meals should be checked with her before they're prepared." Nia kept her voice level. "She said, and these are her words, that she didn't trust my requests because I might be asking for things that would harm the pregnancy." A pause. "She's being cautious." "Elias, she told me last week that Korean women don't complain about morning sickness because we have stronger constitutions." Nia heard her own voice stay flat. That took effort. "She told the driver he didn't need to take me to my prenatal appointment because she'd arrange a physician she trusted. Dr. Wu is one of the best obstetricians in—" "I don't know Dr. Wu." Her voice cracked, not with emotion, with emphasis. She pressed it back down. "I have a doctor. In Chicago, I had a doctor I'd been seeing for 2 years who knew my history, and—" "You're not in Chicago." 3 words. He said them without raising his voice, without cruelty even, which was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. "You're not in Chicago." As if the city she'd left behind was something she should have finished grieving by now. Nia looked at her husband. She'd loved this man for 6 years. She'd sat across from him at a cramped table in a Hyde Park diner while he described his plans, and she believed every one of them. She'd learned to make miyokguk badly and then better. She'd researched Korean visa processes on her lunch breaks. She'd told her mother, who had said, "Be careful," said it with a particular precision that Nia had been too in love to hear, that Elias was the right one. That this was right. "Your mother pushed me," Nia said. Silence. 3 days ago, in the upper hallway, she put her hand on my arm and shoved me toward the wall because I walked in front of her on the way to the sitting room. I hit my shoulder on the door frame. I have a bruise. She pulled the collar of her sweater slightly to the left. There was a bruise, yellow-green at the edges, still dark at the center. I didn't say anything because I thought maybe I thought I was misreading it, but I wasn't misreading it. Elias looked at the bruise. His expression did not change in the way she needed it to change. "She didn't push you," he said. "She's 63 years old. She reached for you because the floor is Elias. Uneven in that section, and she was worried you might Elias." He stopped. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't reconstruct what happened into something I can live with. That's not... I need you to actually hear what I'm telling you." The pause that followed had a weight to it. Outside, the rain intensified for a moment, drumming against the window with brief violence, before settling back into its gray persistence. "You've been under a lot of stress," Elias said. "The move, the pregnancy hormones. I know it's been..." She stopped hearing him somewhere in the middle of that sentence. She'd heard the sentence before, not in those exact words, but in that construction, that particular grammatical move where her perception becomes a symptom and her distress becomes evidence of itself. She'd heard it from her mother-in-law with different vocabulary. She was beginning to understand that she'd been hearing it in various forms for longer than 4 months. She walked past him. Not dramatically, not with the intention of an exit. She simply walked past him toward the door because the walls of that room had begun to feel like they were moving inward, and she needed the hallway. She needed different air. "Nia," his voice sharpened now. "We have dinner at 7. Don't..." She was already in the hallway. The Han family home was the kind of structure that had been designed to communicate wealth through scale. Ceilings that disappeared into shadow, staircases with marble banisters that caught the light from chandeliers that had probably cost more than Nia's mother's house. She'd been awed by it at first, the way you're awed by anything that announces its own importance so confidently. Now it just felt heavy. Too much stone, too much silence between the surfaces. She was moving toward the main staircase, not thinking clearly about where she was going, when she heard the voice. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" Madame Han, she insisted on Madame Han, not Omi, not anything warmer, was standing at the far end of the upper corridor. She was a small woman who had perfected the physics of taking up more space than her body occupied. 70 years of authority, 30 years of running a family empire, a posture that could make a hallway feel narrower. She was wearing deep blue tonight, impeccable. Nia stopped. She squared her shoulders the way her mother had taught her. Back straight, chin level. Don't let them see you adjust. "I'm going to get some air," Nia said. "In this rain." Madame Han's Korean was too fast for Nia on most days, but she'd switched to heavily accented English, which Nia understood was not a courtesy. It was a message about who this conversation was for. "I'll stay in the covered... You've been telling stories to my son." The woman moved down the corridor, slowly, each step placed with the deliberateness of someone who had never needed to hurry for anyone. "Little stories. About injuries. About things you misunderstood." Nia felt her jaw tighten. She kept her voice very quiet. "I didn't misunderstand anything." Madame Han stopped an arm's length away. Up close she was sharper. The cheekbones, the eyes, the particular way she arranged contempt as something almost polite. "You are a guest in this house," the woman said. "You have been permitted certain arrangements because of the inconvenient situation my son created. But you do not belong here. Your child..." Her eyes dropped briefly to Nia's abdomen, and the way her mouth moved around the word child communicated something Nia didn't want to name. "Will have Han blood. The mother is negotiable." The mother is negotiable. Nia stood very still. Her hand found the banister beside her without her deciding to reach for it. The marble was cold under her palm. I am his wife, Nia said. You are a problem, Madame Han said, that my son is not equipped to solve. She reached out then. It was almost casual, the gesture, a hand extended toward Nia's shoulder, not dramatically raised, not telegraphed with anger. It happened in the space between heartbeats. The heel of the woman's palm connected with Nia's shoulder and pushed, not wildly, not with the force of rage, but with the cold precision of someone who had made a calculation. Nia's body went backward. The banister caught the back of her left hand, and then it didn't, because she was already falling, already past the point where her body could correct itself, already on the stairs. She hit the third step on her hip, lost the next two, her elbow catching the fifth in a way that sent white light across her vision, and then the impact of the landing, marble, hard, definitive, and then nothing moved except the chandelier light swinging in her peripheral vision and the sound of rain against the windows and the specific quality of silence that means something has already happened that cannot be undone. She lay at the bottom of the staircase. She didn't move. Her body was doing its own assessment, cataloging what hurt, what didn't, what the absence of hurt in certain places might mean. Her left elbow screamed, her hip throbbed with a heat that would become purple by tomorrow. She could hear her own breathing, ragged and too fast, bouncing off the marble. Her hand moved to her abdomen. Nothing. Not nothing. Not yet. Too soon to know, too soon to feel anything except the desperate arithmetic of a woman counting seconds and hoping. Her palm flat against the swell of her belly, pressing gently, asking without language. Nia! Elias's voice from somewhere above. Footsteps on the stairs. She heard him descend, heard him crouch beside her, felt his hands on her shoulders. Don't move me. Her voice came out strange, compressed. You slipped, he said. She turned her head and looked at him. His face was close to hers, and in it she could already see the story being assembled, the version that was already replacing what had actually happened, stone by stone, until the architecture was something everyone could agree to live inside. She pushed me, Nia said. You slipped. The stairs are... Call an ambulance. Her voice had gone somewhere past fear, into the flat register of a woman who understood that if she stopped insisting on one true thing right now, she might lose it entirely. Call an ambulance. I need to go to the hospital. He called. The ambulance came through the rain, and somewhere between the marble staircase and the white ceiling of Seoul's Seongbuk Medical Center, Nia lost the thing she would spend the rest of her life measuring other losses against. Her daughter never took a breath outside of her. They told her at 11:47 p.m., a female physician, young, uncomfortable, who delivered the information with professional care and her eyes focused somewhere over Nia's left shoulder. Placental abruption from acute physical trauma. They had done everything they could. The words arrived in the right order, grammatically correct, and meant nothing in the specific way that only the most important words can mean nothing. Nia didn't make a sound. She lay in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling and breathed. In, out. The monitor beside her tracked her heart with clinical patience. She was alive. That was the information her body was transmitting. She was alive and her daughter was not, and the ceiling was white and the rain was still falling outside, and none of these facts had any relationship to each other that she could navigate. Elias arrived at midnight. He came in already wearing the expression she would later identify, now she only felt, as the expression of a man who has been briefed, who has had the drive to the hospital to prepare. He sat beside her bed. He didn't take her hand. I'm so sorry, he said. The words were correct. The words were assembled exactly as words of condolence are supposed to be assembled, and they landed in the room like a formal document. Your mother pushed me, Nia said to the ceiling. You were distressed. You've been emotionally... Stop. He stopped. Where is she? Nia said. Your mother. She's at home. She's very... She pushed me down the stairs and our daughter is dead. Nia said it to the ceiling, flat, deliberate, one word after another. I want that on record. I want someone to write that down. I want a statement filed. The silence that followed had a different quality than the previous silences. This one had deliberation in it. The hospital will have a record of the fall, Elias said carefully. Accidental trauma. It will. I didn't fall. She finally turned her head and looked at him, really looked, past the handsome face and the good blazer and 6 years of loving him badly. I was pushed, and you know that. Something moved across his face. She'd like to say it was guilt. She wasn't sure anymore that she knew what guilt looked like on Elias Hahn. You need to rest, he said. We can talk about everything in the morning. But morning came and brought something different than talking. Morning brought a hospital administrator who informed her, with deep professional regret, that per standard protocol, her complaint regarding traumatic causation had been reviewed and, given the absence of corroborating witness accounts, would be documented as accidental trauma sustained in a fall. Morning brought a nurse who had been in the hallway at the time of Nia's admission and who now, gently, carefully, had no recollection of anything the ambulance crew had mentioned about the nature of the injury. Morning brought Elias, who stood at the foot of her bed and told her that they needed to talk about next steps, who used the phrase next steps in the same room where she had spent the night, learning what it felt like to have nothing left in her body that belonged to her future. I think you should go back to Chicago, he said, for some time, to recover. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm your wife, she said. You're not well. The pregnancy was difficult, the transition was difficult, and now you've been through a trauma, and I think, are you ending our marriage? It wasn't a question with a rising inflection. It was the flattest sentence she had ever constructed. He didn't say yes. He said things adjacent to yes. Things about her well-being, about the cultural adjustment, about how the Hahn family dynamics were complicated, and she'd always struggled to integrate, about how their daughter's loss was a tragedy they both needed to process in their own ways. Nia stopped hearing him the same way she'd stopped hearing him in the bedroom. She looked at his mouth moving and understood with total clarity and no drama at all that the 6 years she'd given this man were being filed under miscellaneous, that she had been, in some architecture she was only now seeing the blueprint of, a temporary arrangement. She signed herself out of the hospital against medical advice at 3 p.m. She took her purse and her phone and the clothes she'd arrived in. She left behind the hospital gown and the IV tape on the inside of her elbow and everything she'd believed the night before last. She walked out into Seoul. It was still raining. Of course it was still raining. She stood on the hospital's front steps and let it hit her face and thought, I need to make this right. The thought came from somewhere below language, from a place in her that the last 18 hours had not managed to reach. She didn't know what right looked like yet. She didn't know what she had left to work with. But the thought was there, solid as bone, and she held it. She started walking. She had no destination. She had a phone with 42% battery and a bank account that was joint, and a city of 10 million people who did not know her name. She walked for what felt like hours, but was probably 40 minutes, the rain plastering her hair to her face, her shoes soaking through, her elbows still throbbing with a heat that had nothing to do with infection and everything to do with the particular memory of marble. She didn't feel herself start to fall. That was the thing. She didn't have warning, didn't have the dramatic clarity of a collapse. Her legs simply stopped doing what legs are supposed to do, and she went down. And the last thing she registered before the wet pavement came up to meet her was the sound of traffic and the smell of rain on concrete and a strange, brief, completely undeserved sense of quiet. Hands caught her. Not the pavement. Hands, 2 of them, sure and immediate, sliding under her before she hit the ground and taking her weight with the practiced ease of someone who had held things that were falling before. She was gathered up before she fully understood she was falling and held against a surface that was solid and black and smelled like rain and something colder underneath. She didn't see his face. She was too far under to see anything. But she felt the movement, purposeful, unhurried, of being carried somewhere. And she felt, in the way that you feel certain things at the edges of consciousness when your body has nothing left to protect itself with, that whoever was carrying her had just made a decision about her. She did not know yet what kind of decision it was. She came back to herself in pieces. Not all at once, not with the dramatic clarity of waking from a nightmare, but slowly, the way light comes through a window that isn't facing east. First the warmth, then the surface beneath her, which was soft in a way that cost money. Then the smell. Antiseptic, but faint, layered under something that might have been cedar. Then sound. The particular low hum of a building that has excellent insulation and something electrical running very quietly behind its walls. Then pain, reporting in from its various stations. Her elbow, her hip, the place behind her sternum where something that wasn't physical had been removed. Nia opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was not white. It was a pale gray that had been chosen deliberately, paired with recessed lighting that didn't glare. She was in a bed, a real one, not a hospital bed, though the room had the organized quality of a place where medical things happened. There was an IV line in the back of her left hand, taped neatly, and a monitor clipped to her index finger. The equipment was compact, expensive looking, not the kind of thing you found in a public hospital. She turned her head slowly. A woman sat in a chair beside the bed. Korean, mid-40s, dressed in the kind of understated professional clothing that says, "I don't need to impress you." She had a tablet in her lap and was reading something, and she looked up the moment Nia moved with the attentiveness of someone who had been waiting for exactly that. "You're awake," the woman said. Her English was unaccented. "Don't try to sit up yet. Your blood pressure was very low when you were brought in." "Where am I?" Nia said. Her voice came out scraped, like something that had been left out in weather. "A private medical facility. You're safe." Nia looked at the IV line, then at the monitor, then at the door, which was closed and had no window. "Who brought me here?" The woman's expression didn't change, but something in it became more careful. "Someone who found you collapsed on Bukchon Row. You were in early stages of hypothermia. You'd lost a significant amount of blood." A pause. "I understand you lost a pregnancy last night." Nia looked at the ceiling. "I need my phone," she said. "It's charging. I can bring it to you when I need it now." The woman looked at her for a moment, then nodded and stood. She retrieved the phone from a surface Nia couldn't see and set it on the bed beside her hand. 31% battery now. Someone had plugged it in. Nia didn't pick it up immediately. She looked at it. 11 missed calls, 6 from Elias, 3 from a number she didn't recognize, 1 from her mother, 1 from a Chicago number she identified after a moment as her friend Dana, which meant word had traveled in some form, which meant something had been said somewhere, which meant the version of events that existed in the world outside this room was already being constructed without her. She picked up the phone and called her mother. It rang once. "Baby." Her mother's voice, Constance Carter, 61 years old, a woman who had raised Nia alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bronzeville and who did not panic because she had decided decades ago that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Baby, talk to me." "I'm okay," Nia said. Automatic. The words that get said first regardless of whether they're true. "You're not okay. Dana called me. She saw something online." Nia went still. "What online?" "Some Korean news site. She had it translated." Her mother's voice went quieter, which was worse than if it had gotten louder. "They're saying you went to the hospital after a fall and you're claiming the Han family caused your miscarriage, and They're using words like unstable, Nia. They're using words like, it's already in the news. It went up this morning. There are comments, baby. A lot of comments." Nia sat up despite what the woman in the chair had told her. The movement sent a wave of dizziness through her skull that she breathed through, one hand braced against the mattress. "How bad?" she said. Her mother was quiet for 2 seconds. That was its own answer. "They have a photo," Constance said, "of you outside the hospital. You look—" She stopped. "You look like someone who just lost a child," which you did. "And they're using it like it's evidence of something wrong with you." Nia's jaw tightened until she could feel the pressure in her back teeth. "I'm going to call you back," she said. "Nia, I'm okay. I'll call you back." She hung up. She opened the browser on her phone. It didn't take long to find 4 search terms: her name, Han family, Seoul, hospital, and the results came up like something that had been waiting for her. The headline on the most shared article was in Korean, but there was an auto-translated version, and it said, "Foreign wife of prominent surgeon makes dramatic accusations following pregnancy loss. Han family releases statement." She didn't read past the first paragraph. She didn't need to. The architecture of it was already visible. The distancing language, the framing, the particular way certain words had been chosen to describe her, and other words had been chosen to describe the Han family. Someone had written this with information. Someone had given a statement within hours of her leaving the hospital. She put the phone face down on the mattress. The woman in the chair was watching her with the careful neutrality of someone who was very good at not showing what she knew. "Who is he?" Naya said. "Excuse me?" "The person who brought me here. You said someone found me." She looked at the room again, told the quality of it, the equipment, the way the chair the woman sat in probably cost more than a month of Nia's rent in Chicago. This isn't a person who finds strangers and brings them to any clinic he can find nearby. Who is he? The door opened before the woman could answer. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not dramatically, not the kind of height that announces itself, but the functional kind that changes the dimensions of a room when it enters. He was wearing dark clothing, no tie, a jacket that had been expensive once and was now just a jacket he wore. He looked like he was in his late 30s, maybe 40, with the kind of face that had been through enough that it had stopped performing anything. Sharp jaw. Eyes that were doing something specific when they looked at her. Not assessing her the way a doctor assesses, not looking at her the way a man looks at a woman. Something more lateral than that, like he was filing information. He stopped inside the doorway. He looked at Naya. She looked back at him. "You pulled out the IV," he said. His English was Korean accented and precise. She looked at her hand. She had, without registering doing it, pulled the IV line free at some point in the last 30 seconds. There was a small bead of blood at the insertion point. "I need to leave," she said. "You're not stable enough to—" "I didn't ask for a medical opinion. I need to leave." She pushed the blanket back and swung her legs toward the edge of the bed, and immediately the dizziness came back, harder this time, a full tilt that made the room go briefly sideways. He crossed to her in 3 steps, not urgently. He didn't move with urgency exactly. He moved like someone who had calculated the trajectory and acted on it. His hand closed around her upper arm, steadying, not restraining. She felt the grip, firm, impersonal, and had the involuntary thought that he had done this before. "Sit," he said. "Don't." She pulled her arm back. He let go immediately. She respected that without wanting to. She breathed through the dizziness until it subsided into something manageable and looked up at him. He was standing at a distance now, arms loose at his sides, watching her with an expression that wasn't patience exactly, but was something adjacent. The expression of someone who had learned that waiting was more effective than pushing. "Who are you?" she said. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "Adrian Kwan." The name meant nothing to her. The woman in the chair, however, had gone very slightly stiller, which was a piece of information. "Why did you bring me here?" Nia said. "You were unconscious on a public street in the rain," he said. "An early hypothermia. I brought you somewhere you could be treated." "To your private clinic." "Yes." "Not a hospital." Something shifted in his expression. Almost nothing. Barely visible. "Given where you'd just come from," he said, "I assumed you had reasons to avoid another hospital." She stared at him. The accuracy of that landed somewhere she didn't have vocabulary for. "I need to file a police report," she said. "About my mother-in-law." "I need to—" "You've already filed a complaint with the hospital." She went still. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer. He moved to a small table near the window and picked up a tablet and held it toward her. On the screen was a document. Her complaint, the one she'd made from the hospital bed the previous evening. Official hospital letterhead, case number. "This was marked closed 4 hours ago," he said. "Insufficient evidence." Naya took the tablet from him. She read it. She read it twice, once for the words and once for what the words were doing. Her complaint had been received, reviewed, and closed. The attending physician had noted no physical evidence inconsistent with an accidental fall. Security footage from the relevant corridor, she had specifically mentioned the security cameras, she had specifically asked for that footage, was noted as unavailable due to a system malfunction that had occurred prior to the incident. 3 members of household staff who had been present in the Han residence at the time had provided written statements, each independently describing Nia as distressed and physically unsteady throughout the evening. She handed the tablet back without throwing it. That took something from her. "The footage," she said. "Gone. The staff will not change their statements." She looked at him. "You investigated this in—" She glanced at the monitor, at the date time display. "In the last 6 hours." "I had a head start," he said. She didn't know what that meant, and something told her not to ask yet. She pressed her knuckles hard against her thigh and made herself breathe. She could feel the anger in her chest, real anger, not grief wearing anger's face, but the actual thing, hot and structural. And she needed it to stay useful rather than turn into something that just burned her from the inside. "What do you want?" she said. He looked at her with those filing information eyes. "Nothing from you." "That's not an answer." "It is." People don't carry unconscious strangers to private medical facilities because they have nothing they want. She kept her voice flat and direct. "So tell me what you want, or I'm walking out of here." He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet, the quiet of someone deciding how much to say. "I know who the Hahn family is," he said finally. "I've known for some time. What happened to you last night is—" He paused, chose the next word with visible precision, "consistent with things I already knew about them." "That tells me what you know. It doesn't tell me what you want." "I want the same thing you want," he said. "I want what they buried to come back up." The room was very quiet. Nia looked at this man, the expensive functionality of everything around him, the way the woman in the chair deferred without being told to, the particular quality of stillness he had that you only find in people who have learned that their presence alone changes the room's math. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Because they're not finished," he said. "People like the Hahn family are never just what they did to one person." She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "I don't know you." "No," he said. "You don't. And I don't trust you." "You shouldn't," he said, without any indication that this bothered him. "Not yet." Outside the single window, Seoul was visible through the glass. Towers and traffic, and the gray afternoon light of a city that had continued its operations entirely unaware that her entire life had been dismantled in the last 24 hours. She looked at it for a moment and felt the strange vertigo of realizing that the world will simply keep moving around, a grief that feels too large for motion. She looked back at Adrian Kwan. "I need clothes," she said. "Mine are ruined, and I need to make a call." He nodded to the woman in the chair, who stood without a word and left the room. He moved toward the door himself, stopped with his hand on the frame. "The complaint you filed," he said without turning around. The hospital already sent the documentation to their media liaison. The Hahn family's legal team had a copy within 2 hours of you filing it. She absorbed that. "Before it was closed." "Yes." "So they closed it to match the narrative they were already building." He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. He stepped through the door and pulled it quietly closed behind him. Nia sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment with her feet on the floor and her hands in her lap and her phone face down beside her. She looked at the small bead of blood drying on the back of her hand where the IV had been. She thought about her daughter. She did not let herself think about it for very long because if she let herself fall into that, she would not come back up quickly. And she needed to be upright right now. She needed to be functional. She could fall apart later, in private, in some room that wasn't this one. She picked up her phone. She turned it over. She opened the news articles and read them this time. All of them. The full texts. Even the comments. Even the ones that made her skin go cold with their casual confidence about who she was and what she'd done and what kind of woman makes these kinds of accusations. She read a quote attributed to the Hahn family's publicist that described Nia as having shown signs of emotional instability throughout her time in Seoul and expressed the family's deep sadness about her loss while noting their concern for her mental well-being. She read a brief statement attributed to Dr. Elias Hahn, expressing his grief and his hope that Nia would find appropriate support. She set the phone down. She looked at the door. She thought about the footage that didn't exist, the staff who hadn't seen anything, the complaint that had been closed and laundered and used. She thought about the fact that she had filed that complaint and it had become a weapon pointed back at her within 2 hours, which meant someone in that hospital had been waiting, had been connected, had been ready. She thought about Adrian Kwan saying, "I've known for some time." She was still sitting with that when the door opened and the woman came back with a folded set of clothing, a dark sweater, slim pants, clean socks. She set them on the bed and left again without saying anything. Nia dressed slowly, working around the bruises, breathing through the places that protested. She avoided looking at her own hands. She did not look at the mirror on the far wall. She put her phone in her pocket and her shoes on her feet and stood up straight. She was going to the police station. She knew even as she decided it that it would accomplish nothing. She knew the shape of what was happening now, the infrastructure of it, the reach of it. You don't erase hospital footage and turn staff and pre-brief a media liaison in 12 hours without infrastructure. You don't do that unless you've done it before, unless you have people who know how to do it, unless the systems themselves are already partially yours. She knew all of that. She went anyway, because there had to be a record somewhere, because she was not going to let the last act she performed in her daughter's name be silence. She walked down a corridor she hadn't seen before, long, clean, lit with the same deliberate light as the room she'd woken in, and through a door that opened into a lobby that made her stop for one step. The lobby was not large, but it was very deliberately arranged. 3 men stood at various positions around it in dark clothing and the particular posture of people whose job is posture. A reception desk, plants that looked real. And Adrian Kwan standing near the glass front entrance with a phone to his ear, talking in Korean too fast and too low for her to follow. He saw her. He ended the call. She crossed to him. "I'm leaving," she said. "I need to go to the police." He looked at her for a moment. Then he held up his phone and showed her the screen. It was a news alert. Fresh. The timestamp said 4 minutes ago. She read the headline. Foreign national files unfounded claim against prominent medical family. Sources reveal history of mental instability. Legal review underway. She read it twice. "Legal review," she said. "The Han family's attorneys filed a counter-complaint with the district prosecutor's office this morning," Adrian said. "They are claiming that your hospital complaint constitutes defamation under Korean law. They are also claiming that you caused physical harm to yourself by deliberately falling in order to—" She stopped him with a look. She needed 30 seconds. She took them. She looked at the glass door, at the street beyond it, at the gray sky above Seoul that seemed to have settled permanently into this particular shade of erasure. She breathed in. She breathed out. She looked back at Adrian Kwan. "Show me the footage," she said. He didn't ask which footage. He didn't pretend not to know. He looked at her with those precise, filing eyes, and for the first time since she'd woken up in that room, something moved in his expression that wasn't calculation. He reached into his jacket. He produced a small device, a tablet, thin, dark. He held it out to her. She took it. The screen was already open to a video file. She pressed play with a thumb that didn't shake, and the timestamp in the corner read 2 nights ago, and the location stamp said Han Residence, Seongbuk-gu, Internal System, Corridor 2, Upper Floor. And she watched herself walk down the hallway, and she watched Madame Han come toward her, and she watched the hand extend, and she watched herself fall, and she watched the marble stairs do what marble stairs do to a body, and she watched Madame Han stand at the top and look down for a count of 5 seconds, and then turn and walk away without hurrying. The video was 11 seconds long. She pressed stop. She held the tablet very carefully in both hands. She looked at the still frame of Madame Han's back retreating down the upper corridor. "Where did you get this?" she said. "The Han family's security system runs on a private server," Adrian said. "The server has a secondary backup they are unaware of." She looked at him. "You've been inside their system." He didn't confirm or deny. He looked back at her steadily. "How long have you had this?" she said. "The backup captured it automatically. I accessed it this morning." A pause. "I was already watching their system for other reasons. What happened to you accelerated my timeline." She thought about what that meant. She thought about what other reasons meant. She thought about the infrastructure required to be inside a private family's security server on a timeline that produced 11 seconds of footage within hours of an incident. She thought about the men standing at positions around this lobby and the private medical center, and the name Adrian Kwan spoken with that particular quality of additional stillness by the woman in the chair. She thought about what kind of man operates at that level, and why, and what it cost and who paid it. She handed the tablet back. "If you take this to the police," she said carefully, "it will disappear." "Yes," he said, "or it will be inadmissible, or you'll be investigated for how you obtained it." "Yes." "So it's not police evidence, it's," she thought. "It's leverage." He said nothing. "You want to use this as leverage," she said, "against the Han family, for your other reasons." She kept her voice level. "And you want me involved because I'm the injury. I'm the face of what they did. I make it about more than whatever you're actually after." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not wrong," he said. She breathed. Outside, a car passed on the wet street. Inside, one of the men in dark clothing shifted his weight slightly and stopped. The building hummed with its expensive electrical quiet. "I want more than leverage," Nia said. "I want criminal charges. I want her arrested. I want it in every publication that ran my photo this morning as a headline, and I want them to run a new headline." "That may be possible," Adrian said. "Maybe isn't good enough." He looked at her steadily. "Then let me show you what else I have," he said, "and then tell me if it's enough." He turned back toward the corridor she'd come from. He didn't gesture for her to follow. He simply walked, with the complete assumption of someone who knows the room's geography will rearrange itself accordingly. She stood at the lobby door for 1 second. Then she followed him. Not because she trusted him, not because she had decided anything yet about what kind of man he was, or what his reasons were, or what following him down that corridor was going to cost her. She followed him because the video existed and the complaint was dead, and the headlines were already written, and her daughter had no name on a record anywhere, and somewhere in the architecture of all of this there was a door that led somewhere other than where she'd... The room Adrian led her into was not what she expected, which she was beginning to understand was a constant feature of wherever this man operated. The gap between what you anticipated and what you found was always exactly wide enough to make you recalibrate. It was an office, medium-sized, spare, the kind of room that had been designed to hold information rather than impress anyone. One wall was entirely screen, not a single monitor but a continuous display surface broken into sections, each running different feeds, different data, different documents in Korean and English and what looked like Japanese. A desk that was mostly clear, 2 chairs that were functional, a single window with the blinds angled so that light came in but you couldn't see out. A man sat at the desk. Younger than Adrian, early 30s in a dark shirt, with the particular focused energy of someone who worked in short, intense bursts and was currently between them. He looked up when they entered and looked at Nia with frank assessment, then looked back at Adrian with an expression that asked a question without language. Adrian said something in Korean, short, declarative. The man nodded and stood and took his tablet to the far side of the room. Adrian pulled out one of the chairs and held it, not with the performance of courtesy, but with the efficiency of someone who needed her seated so she could look at what he was about to show her. She sat. He moved to the display wall. "The Han family," he said, "has 4 primary business arms." He brought up a diagram on the wall display. Corporate structure, boxes connected by lines, names in both scripts. Medical holdings, commercial real estate, a private equity fund, and a subsidiary that exists under 7 different registered names in 5 different jurisdictions. She looked at the diagram. What does the subsidiary do? Officially, healthcare consulting. They position medical technologies in emerging markets. They facilitate hospital privatization in regions where regulations are flexible. And unofficially, he looked at her. They move influence, government contracts, regulatory approvals that shouldn't be for sale. They have relationships with officials in 4 countries, including people inside Korea's health ministry, that function as a purchasing system. You want a hospital license approved in 6 weeks instead of 18 months, you use their subsidiary. You want a competitor's clinical trial data to disappear from regulatory review, you use their subsidiary. Nia looked at the diagram. She looked at the Han family's name at the top of it. She thought about Elias, the blazer, the phone, the words, next steps delivered from the foot of her hospital bed. and tried to fit the man she'd known into the architecture of what she was looking at. It didn't not fit. That was the thing she hadn't expected. It fit the way a bone fits a joint, the specific shape of one thing accounted for by the specific shape of the other. "How long?" she said. "The subsidiary has been operating in its current form for 11 years. The Han family took controlling interest 9 years ago, 2 years after Elias Han completed his surgical residency." She did the math without wanting to. 2 years after his residency, which meant 5 years before she met him in a Hyde Park diner with his plans and his particular way of listening that made you feel like you were the most interesting room in a building full of interesting rooms. She kept her face still. "You said you had other reasons," she said, "for watching them." "One of their subsidiaries' contracts involved a hospital system in Vietnam," Adrian said. "They facilitated a regulatory approval that allowed substandard equipment to be classified as meeting international standards. 3 patients died during procedures that should have been routine. The families were paid settlements under non-disclosure. The equipment stayed in use for 8 more months before a separate investigation, unrelated to the Han family, identified the defect." He said it without editorializing. Flat, precise. "You had personal connection to that," Nia said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her steadily. "One of the 3 patients," he said, "was a physician who had been trying to report the equipment failure through official channels for 6 weeks before the procedure that killed her." The room was quiet. Nia looked at his face. She looked at the thing in it that wasn't grief exactly, because grief was what happened in the short term. And this was something that had calcified, had become structural, had been lived with long enough that it had changed the shape of how he moved through the world. "How long have you been building this?" she said. 2 years. "And you're close." "I was close," he said. "Before last night, I had enough to take to 2 journalists and a prosecutor contact I trust. The subsidiary's financial records, communication logs, testimony from one of the officials who received payments." He paused. "What I didn't have was something visible, something that translated outside of financial documentation and corporate structure into a story a person who wasn't already looking could understand." She understood what she was in that sentence. "I'm the visible thing," she said. "Your case makes it human," he said. "It makes it about what they do to people, not just what they do to money. And you need it to go public in a way that creates pressure before they can shut it down again." "Yes." She sat with that for a moment. She sat with the specific weight of being needed for the right reasons by someone who had found her unconscious on a street in the rain, which was either the universe's sense of humor or the most efficient form of recruitment she'd ever encountered. "Show me the financial records," she said. He showed her. She was not an accountant. She was a mid-level urban planning consultant from Chicago who had spent the last 4 months learning to navigate a Seoul grocery store, and she had no formal training in reading corporate financial documents. But she was smart, and she'd done enough grant applications and budget reviews in her professional life to understand the grammar of money moving through structures, and what she saw on that display wall over the next 90 minutes was legible enough. The money moved in circles that were designed to look like straight lines. The subsidiary paid consulting fees to shell companies that paid management fees back into the primary entities. Government officials received payments through intermediary accounts that were 3 steps removed from the Han family's direct holdings. The Vietnam hospital contract showed a markup of 340% between the original equipment cost and the price billed to the regional health authority, with the margin distributed across a set of accounts that had been opened and closed on a schedule. Open for 90 days, receive a transfer, close, open a new account. 3 steps later, the money arrived clean somewhere it could be spent. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at it. "This is not a family that had a corrupt subsidiary," she said. "This is a family that built a machine." "Yes," Adrian said, "and Elias." She said his name for the first time since she'd walked out of the hospital. It came out flat, just a word. "Where is he in this?" Adrian moved to a different section of the display. "His name doesn't appear in the financial structure directly. His surgical practice is kept separate, clean hands." He brought up a set of documents, emails, she realized after a moment, private correspondence. But his signature is on 3 of the subsidiary's foundational documents. and his email account is copied on communications regarding the Vietnam contract during the period when the equipment classification was being processed. He knew, she said. He was informed, Adrian said carefully. Whether he fully understood the consequence, he knew, she said again. Not to argue, just to close the door on the version where he didn't. Adrian didn't contradict her. She stood up. She needed to be standing. She walked to the window, the angled blinds, the striped light, and put her back to the display and breathed for a moment. She'd spent 6 years with a man. She'd built a future in her head, the specific kind you build when you're 23 and in love, with the concrete details that make it feel like planning and not dreaming. The neighborhood, the arguments about furniture, the question of whether to send kids to public school, the half-articulated idea of a practice he was going to run differently than the ones he'd trained in, more ethical, more careful. She'd believed in that version of him. She'd believed in it hard enough to leave Chicago, to move to a country where she didn't speak the language, to sit in that hospital bed and defend him to herself even after his mother had pushed her down a staircase and he'd stood at the foot of her bed and said next steps. And now she was in a room looking at documents that told her that the man she'd built a future for had known, during the period of their marriage, that his family's money had passed through an apparatus that had contributed to 3 people's deaths, and that he had put his signature on the foundational documents of that apparatus before he ever sat across from her at a table in Hyde Park and listened to her like she was the most interesting room in the building. Which meant the question of when he'd stopped loving her was the wrong question. The question was whether there had been a version of her that existed to him outside of what she was useful for. She stood at the window and pressed her palm against the wall and did not cry. There was nothing left in her to cry with. What she felt instead was a specific, clean, completely lucid fury that did not shake and did not blur her vision. It was the clearest she'd felt since the stairs. She turned around. "The prosecutor contact you mentioned," she said. "Can they move on this?" "With what I have currently, maybe. The financial records are strong, but they came through channels that could be challenged. The official who agreed to testify has already contacted me twice in the last week to discuss whether he's willing to go forward." Adrian's expression said what he thought of those calls. He's scared. He's looking for an off-ramp. "And the journalists?" "I have 2. One is solid. One went quiet after the Han family's media liaison reached out to her editor last week." Nia absorbed that. They already know someone is building something against them. They know someone is gathering material. They don't know the shape of it yet. He paused. "They know something accelerated 3 days ago, when you filed the complaint." She looked at him. "My complaint triggered something." "Your complaint introduced a public, visible incident at a moment when they were already looking for pressure points. Their response," he gestured toward the news alert still running on one section of the display wall, "was faster than normal, more coordinated. They're not reacting to a grieving woman making accusations. They're reacting to someone who might be a threat." She thought about that. She thought about what it meant that her daughter's death, in the Han family's strategic calculus, had been processed as a liability management situation within 12 hours. "I want to go to the hospital," she said. Adrian looked at her. "Why?" "Because I filed a complaint and it was closed. I want to file a second complaint, in person, with a written statement, and I want to request the specific names of the staff members who provided those witness statements." She kept her voice even. "I want a paper trail that shows me attempting every official channel. Before we do anything else." He was quiet for a moment. "They'll document your arrival. It will get back to the Han family." "Good," she said. "Let them see me trying. Let them see me believing in the system. The more they think I'm naive, the more space we have." Something moved in Adrian's expression. She couldn't fully name it. It was close to reassessment. "Yuna will go with you," he said, a nod toward the woman she'd first seen in the chair beside her bed, who had reappeared in the doorway at some point. "I don't need—" "You're still medically unstable and you don't speak Korean at the level this conversation requires," he said. "Yuna does, and she knows how to document what happens in that meeting in a way that's useful later." Nia looked at Yuna. Yuna looked back at her with the expression of someone who had already been told and had already decided she was fine with it. "All right," Nia said. They left within the hour. The hospital was 20 minutes by car through afternoon Seoul traffic. A different car than she'd arrived in, dark and unmarked and driven by a man who drove the way you drive when you've been trained to, smooth and attentive and leaving clear exits at every intersection. Yuna sat beside her in the back and said nothing, which Nia was grateful for. She needed the 20 minutes. She looked out the window at the city. She had been here 4 months and she still didn't fully have the visual grammar of it, the way the old and new were layered here, a centuries-old wall next to a glass tower, a traditional market alley running parallel to a boulevard of international brands. She'd been learning it slowly, in the margins of a life that had turned out to be mostly about managing a household that wasn't hers, and a marriage that had been running on borrowed architecture. She thought about her daughter. She allowed herself to think about her for the length of 2 traffic lights. The weight of her in Nia's imagination, not a newborn, not an abstract, but a specific person who had been becoming real for 4 months, who had had a personality already in the specific ways she moved, and the time she moved, and the things that made her still. A person who had been on her way somewhere. The light changed. Nia looked away from the window. The hospital's administrative office was on the 3rd floor, and the woman behind the desk had the careful professional expression of someone who recognized the name on Nia's ID and had been told something about what to do if she showed up. She was polite. She was regretful. She was efficient in the particular way of someone executing a procedure rather than making a decision. The complaint had been closed, and the review process did not permit reopening based on the same evidence. If Nia had new evidence, she could submit it through the formal supplemental review process, which had a 14-business-day turnaround. The staff witness statements were confidential, and their names could not be released to complainants. The security footage gap had been documented by the hospital's technical services team and was consistent with a server maintenance window that had been scheduled. Scheduled, Nia said. Yes, the woman said. Scheduled maintenance. The records were available if Nia wanted to submit a formal documentation request, which had a 21-business-day turnaround. Nia asked for the formal documentation request form. The woman printed it. Nia filled it out at the desk with a pen the woman provided, slowly, legibly, every field. She requested the security maintenance scheduling logs for the past 60 days. She requested the names and credentials of the attending staff on duty at the time of her admission. She requested the complete chain of custody for her original complaint documentation. She submitted it. She received a reference number. She thanked the woman and left. In the elevator, Yuna said quietly, "They'll delay every one of those requests." "I know," Nia said. "Then why?" "Because when we go public with everything, I need to be able to show every door I tried before I walked through the window." She looked at the elevator doors. "I need anyone watching to see that I tried every official thing first." Yuna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Adrian was right about you." Nia looked at her. "What did he say?" "He said you were smarter than your circumstances." The elevator opened. They walked through the lobby, past the information desk, toward the main entrance. Nia's phone vibrated in her pocket. She checked it without stopping. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered it anyway, because she was done letting unfamiliar things pass her. "Ms. Carter," a man's voice, Korean accent, careful English. "My name is not important at this stage. I'm calling because I believe we have interests that overlap." She stopped walking. Yuna stopped beside her, reading her expression. "Who gave you this number?" Nia said. "I'm a journalist," the man said. "I've been working on a story about the Han family's business operations for approximately 4 months. I understand you recently had a very personal experience of how they operate." "How did you get my number?" she said. "A mutual contact," he said. "I think we should meet." She thought about the journalist Adrian had mentioned, the one who'd gone quiet after the Han family's media liaison contacted her editor. She thought about the one he'd called solid. "Are you the solid one or the scared one?" she said. A pause. "I'm sorry?" "Adrian Kwan mentioned 2 journalists," she said. "One went quiet. Are you the other one?" A longer pause. When the man spoke again, his voice had shifted slightly. Less careful, more direct. "You've been talking to Kwan?" "Yes." "Then you already know more than I expected." A beat. "I'm Min Jun Seo. I'm with the Seo Investigative Bureau. Independent, not attached to a major outlet. I've been building the Han piece for 4 months. I had a source inside the subsidiary who gave me 2 months of internal communications before they stopped responding to my messages 6 weeks ago. The source went quiet 6 weeks ago. She did the math on that against what Adrian had said about his own witness getting scared. Different source, same timeline, same direction. Why are you calling me now? She said. Today? Because this morning the Han family's attorneys sent a letter to my bureau's registered address, Min Jun-so said, a pre-litigation notice. They're aware I've been working on a story. They're not naming sources, which means they don't know exactly what I have, but they're making clear that any publication regarding their family business will be met with immediate legal action. He paused. I have 48 hours before my bureau director makes a decision about whether to continue. 48 hours. She looked at Yuna. Yuna was watching her with that same careful professional attention. Where? Nia said into the phone. He named a cafe in Mapogu. 40 minutes from where she was standing, she was already moving toward the exit. They took the car. She called Adrian on the way and told him about Minjun Seo and the 48-hour window. There was a brief silence on his end. I know Seo's work, Adrian said. He's careful. He's also operating without the resources to withstand a sustained legal campaign. He has 48 hours, she said, which means we have 48 hours to give him something he can actually publish, something they can't kill with a lawsuit because it's already out. Can we do that in 48 hours? Another pause. Shorter. I need to make some calls. Go meet Seo. Don't show him the footage yet. See what he has first. The cafe in Mapogu was the kind of place that existed in every city. Anonymous, functional, the kind of background noise that lets sensitive conversations disappear into the general hum of espresso machines and ambient music. Min Jun Seo was already there. Mid-30s, unremarkable in appearance in the deliberate way of a man who had learned that being unremarkable was professionally useful. He had a laptop open and a coffee going cold, and the specific alert stillness of someone who had been waiting longer than the 20 minutes she'd made him wait. He looked at her. He looked at Yuna. He said nothing about Yuna, which told her something. You look worse than your photo, he said. That's because my photo was taken outside a hospital where my daughter just died, she said. He absorbed that. I'm sorry, he said, and it sounded like he meant it, which she filed without deciding what to do with. She sat down. Yuna sat one table away, close enough facing the door. Show me what you have, Nia said. He showed her. It took 40 minutes. His material overlapped with Adrian's in the financial structure. Different documents, same architecture. But he had something Adrian didn't, a recording. Audio, low quality, conversation in Korean, but he had a transcript attached. 2 voices, one of which he had identified through voice analysis as a senior official at the Korean Health Ministry, discussing a payment schedule in the context of an upcoming regulatory vote. This is from your source, she said. Yes. They sent it to me 8 weeks ago. 2 weeks later, they stopped responding. This is enough to publish. It would have been, he said, before the pre-litigation letter. My bureau director is not wrong to be concerned. The Han family has the resources to tie us up in court for 2 years. In that 2 years, we don't have the revenue to operate. So you need something that changes the calculation, she said. Something that makes publishing less dangerous than not publishing. Or something that makes the story too public to kill, he said. If it's out everywhere simultaneously, then there's no single target for the lawsuit, she said. They'd have to sue everyone at once. He looked at her. You're thinking about simultaneous release. I'm thinking about 48 hours, she said, and what it takes to make something impossible to bury. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. His expression changed. She watched the change happen. It was specific and it was not minor. It was the expression of a person receiving information that restructures what they understood a situation to be. He looked up from the phone. He looked at her. What? She said. He turned the phone toward her. It was a message, a single line from a number labeled Source 2, which was not his source from the subsidiary, but apparently a different contact entirely. The message said, Han Elias, U.S. Citizenship Application, 2018, sponsored by Carter, Naya D. Look at the immigration file. She read it twice. She put the phone down on the table. She sat very still. She looked at nothing in particular. The middle distance, the cafe wall, the cold coffee. While something rearranged itself in her understanding of the last 6 years with a kind of horrible mechanical efficiency, piece by piece, the way a building comes apart when the foundation is removed. 2018. She and Elias had been together for 2 years. She'd been 25. He'd come to Chicago for a fellowship, and they'd met through a mutual friend at a birthday party in Wicker Park. And by November of that year, he was talking about a future. And by March of 2019, she'd agreed to marry him, and she had done it because she loved him. She had been certain she loved him, and she had also done it knowing that it would help him with his residency applications, that a marriage to an American citizen had practical advantages, and she had never once let herself examine that practical advantage too carefully because she had not wanted to be the kind of person who looked for the transactional beneath the feeling. She should have looked. She looked at Min Jun-seo. He was watching her with the careful expression of a man who understood he was in the presence of something that wasn't his and that he needed to treat accordingly. "The immigration file," she said. Her voice was somewhere below where she usually kept it. "My source is saying Elias Hahn's permanent residency application in the U.S. was filed in 2018, and your citizenship status was listed as the primary basis for eligibility. His L1 visa was expiring and his options were narrowing." He paused. "If the family's offshore holdings relied on U.S.-based legal structures for certain transactions, and based on what I've seen, they did, then his residency status would have been critical," she said. "Yes." She looked at the table. She looked at her hands on the table. 6 years. The diner, the birthday party, the way he listened. The miyokguk she'd learned to make. The apartment in Hyde Park where she'd started packing boxes, while he watched with an expression she'd read as love, but now understood might have been the expression of a man watching an investment come to fruition. She had not been his wife. She had been a legal instrument. "The mother is negotiable," Madame Hahn had said on the landing of the stairs 2 nights ago, and now she understood what the sentence actually meant, that the mother had always been negotiable, from the moment the family had calculated what she was worth to them and for how long and what would happen when she wasn't worth anything. She sat in that cafe in Mapogu for another 4 minutes without speaking. Min Jun-seo had the good sense to let her. He closed his laptop. He drank his cold coffee. He looked at the table and not at her face, which was the most decent thing anyone had done for her in 3 days. Then she picked up her phone and called Adrian. He answered on the second ring. "The marriage," she said, "was it for the immigration status?" A pause. Not long. Not the pause of someone who didn't know. The pause of someone who had known and was deciding how to deliver it. "The Hahn family's U.S. financial structures required a domestic anchor," he said, "a family member with permanent residency. Elias's visa status was becoming complicated in 2018. Your citizenship resolved that." "How long have you known this?" 3 weeks. She absorbed that. 3 weeks. He had known this for 3 weeks and had decided the correct time to tell her was after she'd been pushed down a staircase and lost her daughter and walked out of a hospital and collapsed on a public street. She understood the logic of it. Tactically, sequentially, the timing made a kind of cold sense. She did not forgive it. "I'm going to need everything you have," she said. "All of it. Tonight." "Nia." "Tonight," she said. "Because we have 48 hours, and I am not spending them being managed." She hung up. She looked at Min Jun-seo. He was looking back at her now. "I have footage," she said. "Security footage from inside the Hahn residence showing my mother-in-law pushing me down the stairs. I have financial records showing the subsidiary's payment structure. I have communication logs placing Elias Hahn's email address on correspondence related to the Vietnam equipment contract." She kept her voice level and precise. "What I need to know is whether you can coordinate a simultaneous release with at least 3 other outlets in the next 48 hours. He looked at her for a moment. "That's not a small ask." "No. I'd need to make calls tonight. I'd need to know the other outlets would actually hold and release simultaneously. If one breaks early, the Hahn family's lawyers can get ahead of it." "Then make the calls tonight," she said, "and tell them what they're getting." He looked at her steadily. She could see him doing the calculation. The bureau director, the pre-litigation letter, The 2 years of potential legal attrition against the thing sitting across from him right now, which was a woman with footage and documentation and nothing left to lose, and the specific quality of forward momentum that comes from having already lost the thing you were most afraid of losing. "All right," he said. She nodded. She stood up. She said, "I'll have everything to you by midnight." She walked out of the cafe into the Seoul afternoon with Yuna 2 steps behind her, and the cold air hitting her face, and her elbows still throbbing, and her heart doing something she could feel in her back teeth, and she thought, 48 hours. She thought, this is what it costs. She thought, I'm going to burn it down, and I'm going to do it correctly. Adrian's facility at night was different from Adrian's facility in daylight. The lobby lights were lower. The men at their positions were different men, but in the same positions. And Adrian himself was at the display wall when she arrived with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled in 3 phones on the desk behind him, which told her the 48-hour calculation was already running. She stood in the doorway and looked at him. "Sit down," he said without turning around. "I'm not here to sit down," she said. "I'm here to work. Show me everything you have that we haven't gone through yet." He turned. He looked at her. The specific look of someone assessing structural integrity, checking whether what they were looking at could bear the load of what came next. Whatever he saw, he turned back to the display wall. "The prosecutor contact," he said. "His name is Kang Dae-won. He's been in the corruption division for 9 years. He's clean. I've checked him more than once. He agreed to receive a formal package of evidence if I could get it to him through a verified chain of custody." "Does he know about the 48-hour window?" "He knows now. I called him an hour ago." He brought up a document on the display. "He can't promise charges within 48 hours. That's not how it works. But he can issue a formal investigative hold on the Han family's assets, which prevents them from moving money while the evidence is being reviewed." "That's not enough," she said. "An investigative hold doesn't make the news. It doesn't create the kind of public pressure that makes burying it too costly." "No," he said. "The press release does that. The hold makes it impossible for them to disappear afterward." She looked at him. "You've done this before." He looked back at her. "Not exactly this, but something like it." He was quiet for a moment. "Once," he said, 3 years ago, a pharmaceutical company was falsifying trial data for a cardiac medication. I had documentation. I had a journalist. I had a regulatory contact." He paused. "It worked." "And the medication?" "Was pulled from market," he said. "The company's founders were charged. 1 is in prison. 1 fled the country." She nodded. She moved to the desk and pulled out the second chair and sat down. And she looked at the display wall and said, "Tell me what we're missing." They worked for 6 hours. It was not elegant work. It was the kind of work that happens at the intersection of fury and precision, where you don't have the luxury of being sloppy, and you don't have the energy for anything ornamental, and every decision is stripped down to its mechanical core. She went through financial documents she hadn't touched yet, learning to read the specific grammar of them faster than she'd expected, the way the brain accelerates under pressure and a deadline. Adrian's analyst, the young man in the dark shirt whose name turned out to be Tae Yang, sat at the second monitor and cross-referenced her questions in real time, pulling documents in response to what she was asking before she finished asking it. Adrian moved between the display wall and the 3 phones on the desk. She heard fragments of his calls in Korean, short, declarative, the particular cadence of a man issuing information rather than requesting it. At 2 in the morning, she heard him raise his voice for the first and only time, a single sharp sentence directed at whoever was on the 3rd phone, and then silence. And then he set the phone down and stood with his hands flat on the desk and breathed for 3 seconds before turning back to the display. She didn't ask. At 3 in the morning, Yuna brought food, something hot in containers from somewhere, rice and soup, and a side of something she didn't identify and didn't care about, and set it on the edge of the desk and left. Nia ate mechanically, her eyes still on the document she was reading, because her body needed fuel and stopping to acknowledge hunger was not something the next 42 hours had room for. Adrian ate standing at the display wall. She noticed this because he ate the way he did most things, efficiently, without ceremony, giving it exactly the attention it required and no more. "The recording Min Jun-seo has," she said, "the audio of the ministry official." "What about it?" If we can corroborate the official's identity through a second source, something documentary, not just voice analysis, it strengthens the evidentiary weight in a way that makes it harder to challenge in the legal fight the Han family is going to bring. He looked at her. We have bank transfer records that match dates and amounts discussed in the recording. Match them explicitly. In the package, we send Kang, timestamp to timestamp, amount to amount. I want him to be able to hold the audio in one hand and the bank record in the other and see the same numbers. Tae-yang was already pulling it up. At 4 a.m, she called Min-jun Seo. He answered immediately, which told her he hadn't slept either. 3 outlets confirmed, he said. 1 international wire service, 1 Korean digital paper with a large English-language readership, and a documentary journalist in Japan who's been following Korean corporate corruption for 2 years and has her own audience. All 3 will hold and release simultaneously if we can deliver the package by 6 p.m. tomorrow. Tonight, she said. Tonight, he confirmed. That's tomorrow's today, 14 hours. You'll have it, she said. She hung up. She looked at the display wall. She looked at what they had. The financial records, the communication logs, the audio corroboration, the immigration documentation, and the footage. 11 seconds of marble staircase and a woman's retreating back. 11 seconds that had been captured by a backup server the Han family didn't know existed, which was the particular irony of people who built systems to control everything. Sometimes the redundancy they built for control became the evidence of what they'd done with it. The footage, she said. How do we authenticate it for press purposes? They'll claim it's fabricated. The backup server has a continuous timestamp chain that begins 2 years before the incident, Adrian said. It's verifiable through the server's hardware registry. The footage metadata matches. He paused. I've already had it reviewed by a digital forensics contact. She'll provide a signed authentication statement. We include that in the package. Yes. She looked at the wall for another moment. Then she said, and the immigration file, the citizenship application. We need the actual documentation, not just CO's source saying it exists. That's the gap, Adrian said. He said it without hesitation, which meant he'd already identified it. U.S. immigration records require a formal request. We can't pull them in 14 hours through official channels. We don't need the original document, she said. We need something that corroborates it. She thought. Elias's L1 visa status in 2018, that would be on record with his employer at the time. See, the hospital where he was doing his fellowship. Personnel records show visa status. Those are also not accessible in... I know someone, she said. He stopped. She pulled out her phone. It was 4:17 in the morning in Seoul, which made it 2:17 in the afternoon in Chicago, and she called a number she hadn't used in 8 months. It rang 4 times, then Nia Carter, the voice of David Mbeki, her former colleague at the urban planning firm, who had left 2 years ago to work in HR compliance consulting, who had a memory for administrative process that bordered on pathological, and who had, on at least 2 occasions, helped her navigate institutional documentation requests that were not strictly within his job description. I heard about what's happening, Dana told me. David. She didn't have time for preamble, and he'd always understood that about her. I need a contact at a Chicago hospital system who can pull fellowship employment records from 2017 to 2019. I need visa status documentation for a specific individual. Tonight. A pause. That's not a small ask. I know. Employment records for a specific individual would require, David, please. The pause this time was shorter. Send me the name, he said, and the fellowship program. I have a contact at Northwestern Memorial who owes me a conversation. She sent him Elias's name and the fellowship details before she'd finished exhaling. She put the phone down and looked at Adrian. 2 hours, she said, maybe 3, if David can get it. He looked at her with that filing expression. Who is he? Someone who's decent, she said. The world has a few. He held her gaze for a moment, and she had the sudden, brief, unwanted awareness of how she must look. 4 hours of sleep in 2 days, borrowed clothes, the particular gray quality of a person running on the fuel of controlled anger. And the equally unwanted awareness that he was not looking at her with the clinical assessment he'd been using since she woke up in that room. Something in the look had changed, and she could not afford to examine what it had changed into. She looked back at the display wall. "Show me the Vietnam file again," she said. "I want to go through the timeline of when Elias's email was copied on those communications relative to when the equipment was classified." He pulled it up. They kept working. David called back at 6:41 in the morning. He had a document, not the original, but a certified letter from Northwestern Memorial's HR Compliance Department confirming dates of fellowship employment and visa status at the time of employment, which showed an L1 visa with an expiration date of November 2018 and a notation that the employing institution had been notified of the visa holder's intention to adjust status through family-based petition. Family-based petition, which was the administrative language for what Nia had been. She thanked David with a brevity that she knew didn't match what he'd done and promised to call him properly when she was through this. He said, "Nia, be safe." She said she would and hung up and sent the document to Taeyong to be added to the package. At 8 in the morning, with 11 hours remaining, she stepped away from the desk for the first time in 4 hours and walked to the window and stood with her forehead almost touching the glass and looked at Seoul waking up below. She could hear the city starting, the traffic building, the distant percussion of delivery trucks and market vendors, all the machinery of a normal day assembling itself. She pressed her hand flat against the glass. She was so tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that lives below the level sleep can reach, in the place where the body keeps track of what it's been asked to absorb. Her elbow had graduated from throbbing to a dull, permanent ache. Her hip was bruised deeply enough that sitting was a managed negotiation. She had been running on controlled fury for 2 days, and she could feel it beginning to cost her at the edges. Small things, the slight drag of her thoughts, the way she had to reach slightly further than usual to find the next word. She stayed at the window. She let herself think about her daughter for 60 seconds. She allowed it. 60 seconds, timed against her own pulse. Not the long fall into it, but the brief standing at its edge. She thought about the flutter, the 3 weeks of small movements, the way she had stood at a window in a different city and felt it and pressed her hand to the glass and believed, with all the stupid courage of someone who doesn't know yet what the world is capable of, that the future was a place she was building toward. The 60 seconds ended. She stepped back from the window. Adrian was behind her. Not close. He was at the desk, doing something with the phones, but she was aware of him in the specific way she'd been trying not to be aware of him, the way a peripheral object in a too-quiet room insists on existing. She turned around. He was looking at her. "The package is complete," he said. "Taeyang has compiled everything. I need you to review it once before we send it." She nodded. She moved back to the desk. The package was 14 documents, 1 audio file, 1 video file, and 3 authentication statements. It was clean and organized and devastating in the specific way that certain sets of facts become devastating when they're placed in the correct order. When the architecture of a thing becomes visible, and you can see not just what was done, but how carefully it was constructed to be invisible. She read through it once, completely, and caught 2 places where the corroboration chain needed tightening, and 1 place where the language in the summary description was ambiguous in a way that could be used in a legal challenge. She marked all 3. Taeyong fixed them. At 10 in the morning, she sent the package to Min Jun Seo. He called her back in 7 minutes. "This is enough," he said, and his voice had the quality of a man who had been hoping for enough and received more. "This is more than enough. I'm distributing to the other 3 outlets now. We hold until 6 p.m. 6 p.m., she confirmed. She put the phone down. She looked at the desk. She looked at Adrian. "Kang Dae-won," she said. "The prosecutor. He has the package." "I sent it to him 2 hours ago," Adrian said. "He confirmed receipt. He's reviewing. The asset hold. He said if the documentation is what I described, he can have a hold order signed by early afternoon." He paused. He also said, off the record, that if the press release goes out simultaneously with an investigative hold, the Han family's attorneys will have a very difficult afternoon. She almost smiled. The muscles that would have made the smile were too tired to complete the motion, but the thing that would have been a smile was there. "What about Madame Han?" she said. "If Kang moves on the asset hold, he'll also issue a travel restriction. She won't be able to leave the country. He looked at her steadily. Criminal charges for the assault and the pregnancy loss will take longer. The investigation has to be formal, but with the footage authenticated and in the public record, the hospital will have no basis to keep the complaint closed. It will be reopened. How long? She said. Months, he said. Possibly longer. She'd known that. She'd known it wouldn't be a single day. She breathed through the specific kind of frustration that comes from understanding intellectually that some things take time and feeling in your body, that time is the one thing you cannot absorb any more of. Elias, she said. The immigration fraud is complicated, Adrian said. Using a spouse's citizenship status for immigration purposes isn't automatically criminal. It depends on demonstrating that the marriage was entered into fraudulently with that specific intent. It would require investigation. But it's on the record now, she said. In the package. It's part of the story. Yes, he said. She looked at the display wall. She looked at Elias Hahn's email address in the communication log, copied on the Vietnam correspondence present in the record. She thought about 6 years. She thought about a diner in Hyde Park and a birthday party in Wicker Park, and a man who listened to her the way a man listens when he has calculated the value of making you feel heard. She thought about her daughter. She thought, let it all come down. At 2 p.m, Kong Dai-wan signed the asset preservation order. Adrian received confirmation by text, a single line, no elaboration, and held the phone toward her so she could see it. She looked at it. She handed the phone back. At 3 p.m, the Hahn family's attorneys filed a second pre-litigation notice, this one addressed to Adrian Kwan's registered business address, demanding the cessation of what they called a coordinated campaign of reputational harassment. It meant they knew something was moving. It didn't tell them what or when. At 4 p.m, Elias Hahn called her. She looked at his name on her screen. She let it ring 4 times. Then she answered. Naya. His voice. The voice she knew, the cadence of it, the specific frequency. She'd been hearing it for 6 years in every context a voice exists in, morning and night, and in the middle of arguments and in the quiet after them. It still landed somewhere that hadn't finished dying. Elias, she said, I need to talk to you. He sounded controlled, but there was something underneath the control, the particular texture of fear trying to sound like something else. I've heard things about documents, about a journalist. What things? She said. Nia, whatever you're planning. Your mother pushed me down the stairs, she said. We have footage. Silence. Your family paid government officials to approve substandard medical equipment, she said. We have financial records and audio. More silence. Different quality now. The silence of a man in a room watching something structural fail. You married me for my citizenship, she said. We have documentation. That's not... He stopped. She heard him breathe. That's not the whole story. What I felt for you was... I don't need to hear it, she said. Nia, listen to me. If you go public with this, my family's attorneys will... I know what they'll do, she said. We've planned for it. A pause. We, he said. The word had something in it she recognized as the specific fear of a man who has understood that the room has more people in it than he thought. We, she confirmed. Who are you? He stopped again. She could hear him thinking, which was something she used to find appealing, the visible quality of his mind working, and now she just heard it as the sound of a calculation running. Nia. His voice had changed, softer now, and she knew this register too. The register he used when he needed her to not do something. The register that had always worked because she had loved him. Because there is a specific vulnerability in love that functions exactly like a structural weakness and can be found and pressed by someone who knows where to look. We lost a child. Whatever happened, whatever you think happened, we both lost something that can't be... Don't, she said. She was my daughter too. The fury came back, clean and total. Don't, she said again, and this time it wasn't a request. He was quiet. 6 p.m., she said. That's when it goes out. Every outlet simultaneously. You have 2 hours to decide if there's anything you want to say on the record first. She paused. "I'd advise you to talk to a lawyer who is not your family's lawyer." She hung up. Her hand was shaking. She looked at it, the slight tremor, the way the knuckle of her thumb was jumping, and she pressed it flat against her thigh until it stopped. She looked up. Adrian was standing at the window. He had heard the call, or enough of it. He had his back to her and his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at Seoul with an expression she couldn't read from behind. 2 hours, she said. 2 hours, he said, without turning. She stood. She moved to stand beside him at the window. Not close. The correct distance. Below them, Seoul moved in its ordinary rhythms, traffic and pedestrians and the thousand small transactions of a city being a city, entirely unaware that in this room, above it, a thing was about to be released into the world that would not be retrievable. That in 94 minutes, Min Jun-seo would press a key, and 3 other journalists in 3 other locations would press their own keys, and 11 seconds of marble staircase and 14 documents and 1 audio file would begin to move through the world at the speed that information moves through the world now, which is the speed of everything, everywhere, all at once. She looked at the city. She thought, "I am about to do something that cannot be undone." She thought, "Good." At 5:58 p.m., her phone buzzed. Min Jun-seo. 1 word. Ready. She typed back 1 word. Go. At 5:59, the Han family's PR director called Adrian's number. He looked at the screen and let it ring. At 6 p.m. exactly, 3 things happened simultaneously. The asset preservation order became active on the Han family's financial accounts. Min Jun-seo's piece went live on the CO Investigative Bureau's platform under the headline Han Family Empire, Corruption, Cover-Up, and the Woman They Tried to Erase. The International Wire Service and the Korean digital outlet and the Japanese documentary journalist released their versions within 43 seconds of each other. Tae Yang had the display wall running the media monitoring software, and she watched the story spread. The shares, the pickups, the other outlets beginning to republish and react, the numbers climbing with the particular velocity of something that has been compressed and is now expanding at its natural rate. Adrian's phone started ringing and didn't stop. She stood at the display wall and watched the numbers climb. She was not happy. She had not expected to be happy. What she felt was closer to the sensation of setting down something that has been carried for too long. Not relief, not triumph, but the specific quality of the body relearning what it weighs without the load. Then Tae-young said something in Korean, sharply, and Adrian moved to the desk in 2 steps and looked at his monitor, and his expression changed. She looked at him. "What?" He picked up his phone. He spoke 2 sentences in Korean to whoever was on the other end. He listened. He said 1 more sentence and hung up. He looked at her. "Madam Han," he said. "She was at Incheon Airport. She attempted to board a flight to Japan 40 minutes ago, before the asset order activated, before the story went live." He paused. Airport security held her at the gate when the travel restriction hit the system. Another pause. "She's in a holding room at Incheon right now. Kang's office has been notified. They're sending someone." Nia stood very still. She thought about a marble staircase and a hand extending and 11 seconds of footage and a woman walking away without hurrying. She thought about her daughter. She thought about the specific expression on Madame Han's face in the hospital corridor. The "you are a problem that my son is not equipped to solve" face, the mother is negotiable face, the face of a woman who had calculated everything and found her own position unassailable. And she thought about that woman sitting in a holding room at Incheon Airport, watching her phone fill with notifications that told her exactly how wrong the calculation had been. Outside the window, Seoul was going dark, the lights coming up across the city in their thousands, and Nia Carter stood in a room above it with her hand pressed flat against the glass, and something in her chest that was not yet peace but was the first quiet thing she had felt in 3 days. She stayed at the window until the feeling passed into something she could carry. Then she turned back to the room. Tae-young was monitoring the spread on the display wall, the numbers still climbing, the republications multiplying in the particular exponential way of something that had velocity behind it. Adrian was on the phone again, Korean, low and rapid, standing at the desk with his back partially toward her. The 3 phones were all lit. She sat down in the chair she'd occupied for most of the last 14 hours and looked at her hands. They were steady now. The tremor from Elias's call had resolved itself somewhere in the last hour, worked out of her system by the forward motion of doing the next thing and the next thing. Her hands were the hands of a woman who had not slept properly in 4 days and had not eaten a real meal in longer than that, and who had a bruised hip and a damaged elbow and was wearing someone else's clothes in a city that still did not know her name in any way she had chosen. But they were steady. She pressed them flat on the desk and looked at what was on the monitor in front of her. The media monitoring feed, the story's reach, the comments beginning to accumulate in Korean and English and Japanese and a half dozen other languages as the thing she had helped build moved through the world at the speed the world moved now. She looked at it for a while without reading it. Then she looked up at Adrian, who had finished the call and was standing with one phone in his hand and looking at the display wall with an expression she still hadn't fully learned to read. "What happens now?" she said. "Tonight, operationally." He looked at her. "Kang's office will have an investigator at Incheon within the hour. Madam Han will be processed, questioned, and released pending formal charges. They can't hold her tonight without a charge, and the criminal case for the assault will take time to build officially. But she cannot leave the country. Her passport will be flagged." He set the phone down. "The Han family's attorneys will be working through the night. They'll be drafting injunction requests, cease and desist demands to every outlet that published, and probably a criminal defamation complaint against Min Jun-seo and against me." "And against me," she said. "And against you," he confirmed. "Yes." She nodded. She had known that part. She had built it into her understanding of what tonight would cost. "And the financial investigation? The subsidiary. Kang has the asset hold active. His team will begin formal review of the financial records tomorrow morning. The subsidiary's Korean-registered entities will be frozen pending investigation." He paused. "The international components are more complicated, different jurisdictions, different timelines, but the Korean anchor freezes everything above it in the structure for now." "The Vietnam families," she said. "The 3 who died." Kang's counterpart in Vietnam was copied on the package. Minjun's piece names the families, not their full details, but their existence. There are advocacy organizations already sharing that section of the story. He looked at the wall. "That will move on its own now." She looked at the wall too. She thought about 3 people who had gone into routine procedures and not come back out, and the families who had signed non-disclosure agreements in exchange for settlements, and the particular kind of silence that money buys when grief is the only thing a family has left to bargain with. "The official who agreed to testify," she said. "Kang's witness. He was getting scared." "He called me 40 minutes ago," Adrian said. "He's no longer scared." A pause. "Public exposure changes the risk calculation. Testifying against a family whose assets are frozen and whose story is on the front page of 4 international outlets is a different proposition than testifying against a family that still has all its resources intact." She understood. The machine had looked indestructible until the moment it didn't, and the moment it didn't, everyone who had been watching from a safe distance began recalculating where safety actually was. "Good," she said. She stood up. She moved to the window one more time. Seoul was fully dark now, the city in its nighttime configuration, the lights doing what city lights do, turning the dark into something you can move through rather than something that stops you. "I need to call my mother," she said. Adrian looked at her. He nodded once and picked up his phones and moved toward the door, and Tae-young, reading the room with the quiet competence he seemed to bring to everything, closed his laptop and followed. She was alone. She called Constance Carter. Her mother answered on the first ring. "Baby." Not a question this time. Something that had been held all day and was now being released in a single syllable. "I'm okay," Naya said. And then, because her mother deserved better than the automatic version, "I'm not okay. But I did something. Tonight. It's out there now. All of it." A pause. She heard her mother breathing. "I saw it," Constance said. "Dana sent me the link an hour ago. I've been sitting here reading it and—" Her mother's voice cracked. Just once, brief, the specific crack of a woman who has been holding something vertical through sheer force of will and is now allowing the load to shift slightly. I saw what she did to you. I saw the footage. Mama, I saw it. Her voice steadied. Constance Carter's steadying was a sound Nia had been hearing her whole life. The particular quality of a woman who decides, in real time, that falling apart is not what this moment requires. You're okay. You're physically okay. I am. And you have people around you. She thought about Adrian. She thought about Yuna. She thought about Tae Yang and Min Jun Seo and David Mbeki in Chicago at 2 in the afternoon who had called a contact at Northwestern Memorial without asking her to explain why. I have people, she said. Then tell me what you need from me. Nothing tonight, Nia said. Tonight I just needed to hear your voice. They stayed on the phone for 11 minutes, mostly not talking, just the connection open and the sound of each other's breathing across 13 time zones. At the end, her mother said, she was going to be something. Your girl. And Nia said, yes. And her mother said, that doesn't go away. And Nia said, I know. And they said goodnight. She stood at the window for another minute after the call ended. Then she went to find Adrian. He was in the corridor outside the office, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and his eyes on the middle distance, and the particular stillness of a man who is comfortable with his own company in a way that isn't emptiness, but isn't peace exactly either. He looked at her when she came out. I need to sleep, she said. A few hours? And then I need to deal with the defamation complaint they're going to file. And I need a Korean attorney who isn't connected to anything the Han family touches. I have a name, he said. Of course you do, she said. Something moved in his expression. The closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him, which wasn't a smile exactly, but was the thing that occupied the same territory in a face that had learned to be economical about what it showed. The room you woke up in is still available, he said. She looked at him. I'm not... She stopped. She started again. I don't want to be managed. If I stay here, I need to be clear about what I am and what I'm not in whatever this is. He held her gaze. What are you? He said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. I'm someone you found on a street, she said, who turned out to be useful to something you were already building. That's the correct version of how we got here. Yes, he said. And I am grateful, she said, for what you had, for what we built with it tonight, for the footage. She said it plainly, without dead in it. But I can't be anyone's instrument right now, not again, not even for the right reasons. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know. She looked at him. The corridor was quiet. The building hummed its expensive hum. I'll stay tonight, she said, because I have nowhere else and I need to sleep. Tomorrow, I find an attorney and an apartment, and I figure out what my visa situation is and what the defamation complaint means for my ability to stay in this country while the investigation runs. Your tourist visa allows 90 days, he said. You have 63 remaining. A formal witness statement to Kang's investigation may allow you to apply for an extended stay. The attorney can advise. She nodded. She turned toward the room. Nia, his voice behind her. She stopped. What you said, about being an instrument. A pause, and she heard something in the pause that wasn't calculation. Something more unguarded, and more careful about its own unguardedness than anything she'd heard from him. You weren't. Not to me. The case? Yes. But not you. She stood still for a moment. I'll think about the difference in the morning, she said, and she went to bed. She slept for 6 hours without dreaming. It was the deepest sleep she'd had since Chicago, which she understood was not about safety in any simple sense, but about the particular exhaustion of a body that has finally been given permission to stop running. She woke at 6 a.m. to 17 missed calls. 3 from numbers she didn't know. 2 from Elias. 1 from a U.S. Embassy contact form she didn't remember filling out, which meant someone had filed something on her behalf. 1 from Dana. 1 from her mother. A voicemail that said, only, call me when you're up, I'm fine, just call. The rest from numbers with Korean country codes and no names. She got up. She used the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror for the first time since the hospital. She looked like someone who had been through something. The bruise along her jaw from the fall had deepened overnight, purple-blue, precise, the body's record of impact. Her eyes had the specific quality of eyes that have spent 3 days in a state of emergency and are now recalibrating to a different rhythm. She looked older than she'd looked 4 days ago. She wasn't sure that was wrong. She got dressed and went to find coffee. Yuna was in the kitchen, a room she hadn't seen before, small and functional, the kind of kitchen that existed to fuel work rather than to be enjoyed. Yuna handed her a cup without asking how she took it, which meant she'd been paying attention the previous day, and Nia drank it standing at the counter and looked at the morning light coming through the single window. The Han family's attorney filed the defamation complaint at 2 a.m., Yuna said. Minjun Seo's bureau has already retained counsel. The International Wire Services legal team is handling their own defense. They're large enough that it's not a concern for them. She paused. Your name is listed as a co-respondent. When do I need to appear? You don't yet. It's a preliminary filing. You'll receive formal notice. Yuna looked at her. Adrian has a contact at Song and Park. They're an independent firm. No Han connections. They've done press freedom work. I can have someone there call you this morning. Yes, Nia said. Please. She took her coffee to the office. Taeyang was already there, which meant he had probably not left, or had left briefly and come back. The display wall was still running, but quieter now. The immediate velocity of the story had settled into the secondary phase, the responses and analyses and official statements that come after the first impact wave. She looked at the wall. The Han family had released a statement at midnight. It was what she had expected, measured, lawyered, expressing deep concern for Nia's well-being while noting that the allegations against the family were entirely false and the subject of active legal challenge. It used the word misleading 4 times. It used the word fabricated twice. It described Adrian Kwan as a known figure in organized criminal networks whose involvement in the matter should be a significant concern to anyone evaluating the credibility of the allegations. That part she read twice. Adrian was not in the office yet. She read the statement a 3rd time and thought about the word organized and thought about the lobby with the men at their positions and the private medical center and the server he'd been inside for 2 years and what you had to be in the taxonomy of the world to operate at that level. She had not asked him directly. She had moved around the edges of it because the answer mattered, and she hadn't been ready for it to matter yet. She was going to have to be ready. He came in at 7:30 with his jacket on and the look of a man who had slept in the hours she was awake and had already been somewhere this morning before returning. He looked at the display wall. He looked at her. You read their statement, he said. The part about organized criminal networks, she said. Tell me what's accurate. He didn't look away. Sit down, he said. I'd rather stand. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, The work I do is not within the law. Parts of it. He said it with the specific quality of someone who has decided that there is exactly one version of this truth, and it is the unqualified one. The server access, the financial record retrieval. The way I operate, the facility, the people, the infrastructure, it exists outside of legal structures. Are you, she said carefully, in the business of hurting people? No, he said. That's not sufficient. I know. He moved to the desk and stood beside it. The people who have worked for me and with me have done things I don't always control completely. I have had to make decisions about acceptable costs. I have not always decided correctly. He held her gaze. I have never directed violence against civilians. I have never trafficked anything. I have never operated the kind of system that the Han family operates. But you operate a system, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had caught her before she hit the pavement, who had spent 6 hours beside her building something that had, overnight, changed the shape of what was possible for people who had been buried by the Han family's machine. She looked at the footage that had come from a server he'd been inside illegally, and the financial records that had come through channels that were not official, and the infrastructure that had allowed all of it to happen in a timeline that no legal operation could have matched. She thought about the 3 people who had died in Vietnam. She thought about the official who had been paid, and the medical records that had been rewritten, and the footage that had been officially erased, and the system that had done all of it without consequence for 11 years. She thought about what it cost to fight a machine. The woman who died, she said, the physician in Vietnam. who you said you were watching the Han family because of. He was still. Who was she? Nia said. The quality of his stillness changed, not dramatically. But she had been watching this man's face for 4 days, and she had learned its economy, the way it spent its expressions carefully, and what happened now was more expensive than anything she'd seen from him. Her name was Su Yan, he said. She was my sister. The room was quiet. Nia looked at him. She looked at the face of a man who had spent 2 years building a case against the people responsible for his sister's death, who had assembled infrastructure and documents and contacts, and who had found her on a street and recognized what she was and what she could add to a thing he had been building alone, and who had told her she wasn't an instrument, and who, she now believed, with the specific clarity of a person who has nothing left to protect themselves from the truth, had meant it. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at the display wall. She was trying to report the equipment failure, he said. She had filed complaints with 3 different regulatory offices over 6 weeks. Every one was closed. She went into surgery on a Thursday. It was a procedure she had performed successfully dozens of times. He stopped. The instrument failed during the procedure, the same instrument she had reported, the defect she had documented. Nia said nothing. She let him finish. She was 34 years old, he said. She had a son. He is 6 now. He lives with my mother. He looked back at her. I have been trying to do this correctly since she died. Through legitimate channels first. I spent 8 months trying legitimate channels. And then I decided that legitimate channels were a system the Han family had already purchased, and I began to work differently. She looked at him for a long time. The attorney you're sending me to, she said finally, Song and Park. They don't know about the methods. No, he said. What they have is what can be shown in a courtroom. The footage, the authentication chain is legitimate. The financial records were compiled from documents that can be traced back to legitimate sources through Kong's official investigation, which will subpoena them properly. Minjun Seo's audio has independent verification. He paused. The original retrieval methods will never be in a courtroom. What will be in a courtroom is everything the official investigation finds using the roadmap we provided. She understood. The map was illegal. The territory it led to was real. She breathed. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay. I'm not endorsing it, she said. Oh, what you do, the system you run. I can't. I'm not asking you to. But I understand why you built it, she said, and I understand why it was the only thing that worked. He held her gaze. She held his. Your sister, she said, when this is done, when the Han family is finished, will that be enough? He looked at the wall. A long pause. No, he said. It won't bring her back. It won't fix what her son lost. He looked at Nia. But it will mean that the people who chose to let it happen will face a consequence, and that the mechanism they used won't work for anyone else the way it worked against her. She nodded. She thought about her daughter. She thought about the 6 weeks Su Yan had spent filing complaints while the defective instrument stayed in rotation. She thought about the 11 years the Han family's machine had been running and the number of people who were its acceptable costs, its negotiable mothers, its collateral. Then let's make sure it's finished, she said. The weeks that followed were not clean. Nothing about it was clean. The defamation complaint moved through the preliminary stages with the grinding pace of legal processes everywhere. Filings, responses, continuances, motions that generated countermotions. Song and Park assigned her an attorney named Ji-hai, who was 40, precise, and had the particular energy of someone who had chosen her work because she genuinely found injustice offensive as an aesthetic. Ji-hai filed Nia's formal witness statement with Kang's office, applied for an extended stay on humanitarian grounds tied to the active investigation, and appeared at the first defamation hearing wearing a navy suit and an expression that communicated to opposing counsel exactly where this was going. The Han family arrived at the first hearing with 4 attorneys. Madame Han was not present. She had been formally charged with assault and negligence resulting in bodily harm and the pregnancy loss, and her attorneys had advised her to avoid public appearances. Elias came. He sat across a room from Nia for the first time since the hospital and did not look at her, which told her everything she needed to know about what he was still trying to manage. She looked at him directly for most of the hearing. She wasn't trying to punish him with it. She was simply done looking away. The defamation case did not go well for the Han family. The simultaneous international publication had created a legal environment in which the burden of proving malice, the standard required for defamation against a matter of public concern, was going to require the Han family to demonstrate that 14 corroborated documents and an authenticated video were fabrications. Jihai's assessment, delivered without drama in a coffee shop near the courthouse. They would settle before discovery. They settled 6 weeks later. Not in Nia's favor in every dimension, these things never were, but in the dimension that mattered to her, which was that the settlement required the Han family to retract the public statement calling her allegations fabricated and to issue a correction to every outlet that had carried the original response. The correction was 3 paragraphs long. It used the phrase, "We were in error." Jihai sent her a copy by text with no commentary, which was the correct move. Kang Dae-won's investigation moved more slowly and arrived somewhere more significant. The asset hold became a formal freeze. The subsidiary was placed under judicial administration. The health ministry official agreed to testify formally and produce documentation that led to 3 additional officials being identified and interviewed. The Vietnam component was taken up by a joint investigative body that included South Korean and Vietnamese prosecutors. In the 4th month, Madame Han was indicted. Assault, criminal negligence, obstruction of justice for the direction given to household staff to provide false statements, and a separate charge related to the direction given to a hospital employee, a contact of the Han family, who had been placed in the administrative role specifically, to close the complaint and suppress the documentation. The hospital employee cooperated fully with investigators, which reduced her own exposure and significantly increased the evidence against the woman who had given her the instructions. The indictment was reported in the same outlets that had run the original story. Jihai texted, "Front page." Nia read it on her phone in the apartment she had found in Mapogu, a 2-room place on the 4th floor of a building that had nothing to recommend it except a window that faced east and a landlord who did not care about her story. She sat with the indictment article for a long time. She thought about what she had wanted, in the very beginning, the cold, clean, furious clarity of those first days. She had wanted criminal charges. She had wanted the footage on every screen. She had wanted the system that had erased her daughter's existence as a fact to be exposed as a system and seen for what it was. She had gotten those things. They did not give her back what had been taken. She had known they wouldn't. She had wanted them anyway, because the alternative was silence. And silence in the face of something like this is not neutral. Silence is a form of agreement. She had not agreed. Elias entered a separate legal process, the immigration fraud investigation, which took longer and arrived less dramatically. He was never charged criminally. The evidence of fraudulent intent was strong in civil terms, but more difficult in criminal standards, and his own attorney was very good. He was, however, named in the subsidiary investigation as a knowing recipient of communications regarding the Vietnam equipment contract, which meant his medical license review was initiated by the Korean Medical Board. The outcome of that review was still pending when Nia left Seoul. She left in the 6th month, not because she had to. Her extended stay had been granted and renewed. She left because she had done what she came to do, not what she'd come to Seoul for originally, not the life she'd been building toward, but the things she'd been doing since she walked out of that hospital. And because Chicago was her mother, and her name in a language she'd grown up speaking and a version of herself that existed before any of this. She did not leave without finishing something first. 3 weeks before her departure, she met with 2 attorneys and a nonprofit administrator who worked in cross-border family legal assistance. She had spent the previous weeks drafting a proposal, frameworks for legal support for foreign nationals facing discrimination and medical negligence within Korean institutions, modeled on existing international advocacy structures but specifically designed for the gap she had fallen through. The gap between having a complaint and having someone who could make it stick. The administrator, a woman named Park Hae-in, who had been doing this work for 12 years, read Nia's proposal in its entirety before their meeting and opened by saying, "This is more complete than most things I see from people who've been doing this for a decade." Nia said, I had good reasons to think it through. Park Hye-in said, Yes, I read about your reasons. They met 4 more times over the following weeks. The framework Nia had drafted became the structural basis for a new program within Park Hye-in's organization, with Nia listed as co-founder of the initiative and committed to supporting its development from Chicago. Funding applications, public advocacy, the particular leverage that came from being the face that was already on 4 international news outlets. She did not name the program after her daughter. She had thought about it and decided against it. The program was not a memorial. It was a system designed to prevent the thing that had happened to her from happening to someone else, and she wanted it to carry forward rather than backward. She would keep her daughter's name for something private. She kept it in her chest, where it had always been. On the morning she left, she met Adrian in the lobby of a hotel near the airport. Neutral ground. She had suggested it, and he had not disagreed, which meant he understood the geometry of it. He was there when she arrived. He had a coffee he wasn't drinking and no phones visible for the first time since she'd known him. He stood when she came in, which was a formality she hadn't expected from him, and which landed somewhere small and genuine. They sat across from each other. Kang's team found 2 additional shell companies last week, he said. The international component of the asset investigation is expanding. Ji-hye told me, she said. It's going to run for years. Yes. You'll be watching it, she said. Yes, he said, as I'm permitted to. A pause that acknowledged everything the phrase permitted to covered. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had built a 2-year case against the people who had let his sister die, who had operated outside the law to do it, and who had, on a rainy night on a street in Bukchon-ro, caught a falling stranger and made a decision that neither of them had fully understood the dimensions of at the time. Soo-yeon, she said. What was she like? He looked at her. Something in his face opened slightly. The specific quality of a person who is rarely asked about the person rather than the case. Stubborn, he said. She had no patience for things being done wrong when they could be done correctly. She reported the equipment because she couldn't not report it. The idea of knowing something was defective and not saying so was not available to her. He paused. She used to call me too direct, which was, from Soo-yeon, that meant something. Nia looked at him. She sounds like she was worth fighting for, she said. Yes, he said, simply. She was. They sat with that. I'm going to think about you, she said, after I leave, not... She stopped and started again. I'm going to think about what you are and what you do and whether I've made the right decisions about how I've involved myself with your methods. I haven't finished deciding. I know, he said. But I'm also going to think about what it means that the system that exists for the people the Han family hurt had nothing in it that worked, and you were what worked. She kept her eyes on his. I don't have a clean answer for that. Neither do I, he said, and I've been living inside the question for longer. She nodded. She picked up her bag. She stood. He stood. They did not embrace. They looked at each other across the small distance of the table, and she thought that in some other version of a life, she would have had more time to understand what this man was and what she might have wanted to do about it. She was 30 years old, and she had lost a marriage and a daughter, and 6 years of a belief about who she was in relation to another person. And she was still standing, and the man across from her had helped make that possible, and none of those facts resolved each other into anything simple. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, he said. She left. The flight was 14 hours. She slept for 7 of them. Real sleep, deep and undefended. The sleep of someone who has arrived at the other side of something and whose body finally believes it. She landed at O'Hare on a Tuesday morning in October, and her mother was at the arrivals gate, which was not something Nia had asked for, and not something Constance Carter had asked permission for. She was just there, in her good coat, with the expression of a woman who has been waiting and is now done waiting, and when Nia came through the doors and saw her, she stopped walking for just a moment. Then she kept walking. Her mother put both arms around her and held her with the specific grip of someone who had been holding the idea of this moment for months, and Nia put her face against her mother's shoulder and breathed. She didn't cry. She had thought she would. But what she felt was not grief in that moment. It was something older and quieter than grief, something that existed below the level of events, in the part of a person that persists through the things that happen to them and remains, stubbornly, essentially, itself. She was home. Her daughter was not with her and would never be with her, and that was the weight she would carry for the rest of her life without it being diminished by justice or time or anything the world could offer. She knew that now without flinching from it. The knowing was not the same as being crushed by it. She had learned the difference. She straightened. She stepped back. Her mother looked at her face, reading it the way her mother had always read her face, with the complete attention of someone who had been doing it for 29 years. "You look different," Constance said. "I know," Nia said. "Not bad different." "I know," she said again. They walked out of the airport together into the October morning, the Chicago air sharp and familiar and carrying the lake on its underside, and Nia tilted her face toward the sky. Gray, Midwestern, honest about what it was, and breathed it in. In Seoul, 3 months later, a quiet riverside memorial was established through the advocacy initiative that bore no name except the organization's own. A small bronze marker near the Cheongyecheon stream, placed by families who had been helped through the program's first funded quarter, listed no names, only a dedication in Korean and English that read, "For those who were told their losses didn't matter, they did. They always did." Nia did not attend the dedication. Park Hye-in sent her a photograph. She looked at it for a long time on the screen of her phone, in the 2-bedroom apartment in Bronzeville where she'd moved back in with her mother while she figured out the next thing. The marker. The stream. The pale autumn light falling across the water. She set the phone down. She went to the window. Outside, the street was doing what streets do, moving, continuing, the ordinary machinery of a world that does not stop for any particular grief. She had a meeting in 2 hours with a Chicago-based immigration law clinic that wanted to discuss partnering with the Seoul Initiative. She had a call with Ji-hai at noon about the ongoing litigation, which had entered a phase that required less of her time but still required some. She had a message from Min-jun Seo, sent the previous evening, noting that the health ministry official's formal testimony had been entered into the record and that the trial date for the subsidiary's principals had been set for March. She had her mother's voice from the kitchen, asking about breakfast. She had the morning light on a familiar street in a city that was hers. She had the specific quality of a person who has been broken and has not been repaired. Because repair implies returning to the original condition, and she was not who she had been before, but who has been, in the most important sense, reconstituted, who has found, in the rubble of what was taken, the thing that was always underneath it, and that no one had the power to take, the absolute, stubborn, foundational fact of her own self. She stayed at the window for a while longer. Then she went to have breakfast with her mother. The pain was still there, it would always be there, but it no longer defined the room she stood in. It was simply part of the room, present, acknowledged, carried. While outside the window, the city went about its life, and inside the kitchen, her mother was making something that smelled like home, and the morning was doing what mornings do, which is arrive. And she was still here, and she walked toward it.